there are differences between a performer and an archer. So, over the past few days, there's been a lot of buzz and controversy over the idea of stunts and safety in archery. And one of the most common points or counterpoints is, well, what about knife throwing? What about circus performances? Why don't you care about them? And a similar point was raised about, well, how many people have died from the William Tell stunt. So, we're going to go through a few reported incidents of stunts involving the shooting of arrows, especially towards people, and when they do go wrong. Now, has anyone died from it? Well, not that I know of, but certainly this stunt has gone wrong numerous times. And while the consequences have not been fatal, they have quite dramatically been quite serious in many cases. Before that, I think it's important to establish a benchmark here. Now, this band, or this painting for man, is of William S. Burroughs, a famous American writer, part of the Beat generation. He's been often brought up as a counterpoint to safety, especially the William Tell stunt. Now, he is infamous for one particular incident, and it's this one. On September 6, 1951, Burroughs and Volma, who is his wife, were in a rare period of harmony, and they attended a party together at a bar in Mexico City. The heavily intoxicated Burroughs suggested that they should demonstrate their William Tell act to their friends at the party. They never performed the act before, and it ended up being a tragic catastrophe that sent Volma to her grave and Burroughs into a lifetime of guilt and regret. Volma put a highball glass on her head, and Burroughs was supposed to shoot it with his revolver. Burroughs aimed too low and shot Volma in the face, instantly killing her. She was buried in Mexico City, and he fled back to the US to escape prosecution. He was tried in absence and convicted to a 2-year prison sentence because he was found guilty of culpable homicide. And that's the story of William Burroughs, and he's, again, often brought up as the exemplar, the prime example of what happens when people think that they are above safety. Now, you might say, well, firstly, he was drunk. Secondly, it's a revolver, not a bow. Well, remember, guns are more accurate than bows. They're less reliant on user skill, and fewer things can go wrong. So, obviously, shooting a gun towards a person can have fatal consequences, as we've discovered. But what about bows and arrows? How can they be dangerous? Now, quite a few people have brought up talent shows like America's Got Talent and, in this case, Britain's Got Talent. This particular stunt involves a set of crossbows which have been lined up, and in this case, the judge, Alicia, pulls the triggers to launch crossbows. Now, these crossbows have been basically pre-aimed at the spots here, so there's hardly any risk. That said, even a stunt like this goes wrong, and in this particular video and incident, there were incidents of crossed wires. So by pulling the lever, a different crossbow fired. In some cases, two crossbows fired, sending 2 arrows out, and some of them passed near to this particular participant. Look, this is not an example of incredibly dangerous stunts because everything's pre-aimed, but it is an example of how even mechanical things which are more accurate can go wrong. Now, more to the point, we have America's Got Talent, and this was a very well publicized incident back in 2016. As the name of the video suggests, this involves the contestant, Ryan Stock, being shot in the throat by a flaming arrow, and this is commonly talked about in safety issues. So that's the stunt. Now, thankfully, nothing serious happened. The arrow was blunted, but nonetheless, he copped a flaming arrow to the throat. And he was okay, But when it happened, according to behind the scenes and interviews, there was a lot of panic from Ryan Stock. He felt like he had been shot, and obviously he was. He felt like he was on fire, and he had to see the EMTs. And this is a key example of how even a fairly simple setup can go wrong. And look, this is very short distance. This is how far away is this? Let's take a different view. So this is a distance of less than 10 meters. You can probably approximate if that's the length of say a meter. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus the upward steps. So this is approximately like 6.5 meters from the shot to Ryan Stock, and this is a point blank distance. You actually can't miss from this distance, especially for crossbow. And yet, malfunction. They claimed a malfunction. It actually looks like the shooter was aiming too low. It doesn't look quite right here. But in any case, the flaming projectile dropped low and hit Ryan Stock in the throat. It could have been in the head. It could have been in the eye. There's no protection here. So obviously, there is a huge safety risk, and that goes without saying. And when something goes wrong, then something bad can happen. In this case, it was not a severe injury. It was fine, but yes, that is risky, and it does prove that things can go wrong, even with the most accurate of instruments. And this isn't the only example of something going wrong. This is an article from 9 months ago. Woman hurt in crossbow stunt during magic show. And again with the crossbows. A performing artist has been injured after she was hit by an arrow during the illusionist's magic show. Wednesday night's show at Monte Casino was briefly disrupted when the woman was hit by a malfunction in crossbow. She was taken to hospital where she received stitches to her head. Show manager Hazel Feldman says it was the first time in 10 years that something like this has happened. Everything is trickery and smoke and mirrors. They're all very fortunate and breathing a sigh of relief. And look, this is a great example of how we cannot take safety at 100% value, because in 10 years nothing happened, but it still happened. And again, we have a crossbow, one of the most accurate instruments in archery, can go wrong. Other examples of accidents happening. 2001, woman loses eye while trying to catch arrow mid-air. An apparent stunt gone terribly wrong cost a Bayonne woman her left eye when she was hit with an arrow shot by a martial arts student, according to the Jersey Journal. The woman, identified by the newspaper as Artie Rishi, a 20-year-old first-degree black belt in karate, is still recovering from the summertime accident that took place at Central Dojo on Broadway near 14th Street. Rishi was in charge of the school in the absence of owner Sensei Chris Chokyo, according to police reports, and the stunt involved her trying to catch the arrow shot at her in mid-air. It deflected off her arm into her eye. Sources said she and the student attempted to remove the arrow themselves. Oh my god. And just to add a bit more horror, there was little we can do for the woman because the eye was out of its socket. And what I'm reading here is that the arrow went in the eye and the arrow was pulled out. The arrow was not in the eye when we got there. And I should point out that the master said that had he been there, he would never have allowed such a stunt at his school. That's not the kind of school we run, he said recently. 1993, man shot in head with arrow suffers no damage to brain. How lucky he was. Portland, Oregon. A man who was shot through the skull with an arrow by a friend trying to knock a fuel can off his head survived with no brain damage, doctors say. Surgeons removed the arrow from Anthony Roberts' head by drilling a larger hole around the tip of the skull's back and pulling the arrow through. Roberts, 25, was shot Saturday at the friend's home in Grants Pass, about 200 miles south of Portland. No charges were filed against his friend. Paramedics saved his life by restraining him when he tried to pull the arrow out himself in the helicopter on the way to University Hospital in Portland, said Dr. Johnny B. Delashaw. If he succeeded, the flanges slicing through his brain would have killed him instantly, said Delashaw, a neurosurgeon at the hospital. The arrow's tip went 8 to 10 inches into Robert's brain. Robert, an unemployed carpenter, lost his right eye. At a hospital news conference Tuesday, Robert initially told reporters that he was walking through a park when he heard a bow fired, then felt the arrow hit. Later, he told him his friend was trying to knock the gallon can off his head as part of an initiation into a rafting and outdoor group called Mountain Men Anonymous. Investigators said they had no doubt that the can story is true. Robert, who is expected to be released from hospital in a few days, said he was drinking with friends when the accident occurred. "I feel really stupid," Robert said. And one more key example is from this book, actually, Acts of Trust, Making Sense of Risk, Trust and Betrayal in Our Relationships by Mary Farrell. When I first got in touch with Ross Hartzell, a bizarre circus accident had just hit the news. In front of some 4,500 spectators at a World Circus Festival in Paris, another circus couple had been about to perform the William Tell act. Alain Jamet aimed his crossbow at the apple on his wife's head and missed. The arrow struck Kathy Jamet just below the eye. Ross told me, "From my experience, it is inconceivable for a shot to go that wrong. From the aim point of an apple shot being about 3 inches above one's head to a location under the subject's eye, that's about 9 or 10 inches. That's a very long way off. I only hope that Pullman survives." And Kathy Jamet did survive, and the last reports were that the Grey Arrow Act would be back on show before too long. And if some of these reports are not horrifying enough, let's actually take a look at what happens when someone is shot in the head with a proper bow and arrow. And as a very, very big warning, this is graphic, so if you are queasy at seeing an arrow shot through someone's head, please look away, stop the video, whatever. This is what happens. So this particular incident happened due to a group of brothers who were hunting, and according to the news story posted below, one of them had knocked another who was at full draw of a compound hunting bow, and it discharged into the third brother's head. And I'll just let the pictures speak for themselves. So, what can we learn from this? Firstly, there is no such thing as 100% safety. Even a stunt or a trick that has been practiced for a decade can still go wrong. Even using the most accurate and precise and reliable of tools, which require minimal human input, still go wrong. Sometimes the effects are not catastrophic. Sometimes they result in very serious permanent injuries. Moving on from there and onto the second question that has been posed in relation to these performances. Why do we care about a certain archery stunt video and perhaps not so much about these stage performances in these talent shows and circuses? I've thought about this, about why we care or don't care, and this is the answer which I think is the most relevant. As archers, we are affected by what other archers do. The people who have been featured in this analysis are not archers. They are performers. They are random people who got drunk and shot at each other, but they're not archers. So, as an archer and as a sport or a field, we have no association with any of these people. Just as how not everyone who gets punched in the head is going to result in the local boxing club being shut down, or how a shooting isn't going to affect the local shooting range, hopefully anyway. But when you have someone who claims to be an archer or is associated with archery doing these stunts, then that does look very bad on the entire sport. Firstly, because no real archer would actually perform these stunts with the unnecessary risk, given the results and consequences that we've seen can happen. And secondly, by association, that particular person does represent the entire sport, whereas a circus performer does not. There are differences between a performer and an archer. Just because somebody uses a tool which is used in archery, such as a bow or crossbow, doesn't make them an archer. An archer is trained with much more skill and proficiency for one. They're also trained to not do this kind of stunt. And that is why ultimately the argument that, well, people throw knives in circuses doesn't concern us, because one, it's not archery, two, it's part and parcel of the circus performance, and three, as performers, they have their own standards and their own training. What a knife thrower does has no relation to what a professional archer does. And likewise, and there are many incidents of circus acts involving bows and arrows going wrong, because these people are not archers and are not practicing archery, and no one in the audience associates the act with archery, then it actually doesn't influence us. But as we said, if there is any claim to being an archer, then it is the responsibility of the archery community to speak out against what may appear to be gross negligence of safety standards and protocols. Anyway, that is my extended answer. And again, if you don't agree with me, then that's fair. If you want to add more to the discussion, then post your thoughts below. I do think that the discussion on safety is extremely important, especially in understanding why there's been such a very large and negative reaction in the last few days. Again, if this is something that you want to do in your backyard, in your spare time, in your own private space, then no one's going to stop you. But, safety is there for a reason, rules are there for a reason. And people who are well trained, and especially in formal structured environments with lots of people, understand the importance of having to follow rules and safety. Anyone who chooses to go beyond that, you're taking your life into your own hands, quite literally. Whatever it is you choose to do, don't ruin it for the rest of us. But more importantly, stay safe.